Hello everyone, this is Bonfire Madigan. We're not crazy, the system is. Tune into the Radical Mental Health Show hosted by the Freedom Center, Wednesday nights, 6 to 7 p.m. on Valley Free Radio, WXOJ 103.3 FM.
Our guest today is Kalle Lasn, who is the editor of Adbusters magazine. Adbusters is the journal of the mental environment and is all about culture jamming and anti-corporate educational spoof ad media campaigns, Buy Nothing Day, the Black Spot sneaker. I'll read Kalle's bio here. Kalle is the co-founder of Adbusters Media Foundation and an internationally known media activist, publisher, and filmmaker. He was born in Tallinn, Estonia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Tallinn, Estonia. His family moved from Europe to Australia after the Second World War, and he earned his Bachelor in Science in Pure and Applied Mathematics from the University of Adelaide in 1961. From 62 to 65, Kalle worked for the Australian Defence Department. In 1965, he moved to Tokyo and started a market research company, which he ran for 5 years. He immigrated to Canada in 1970, and in 1972 established a documentary film company. His documentary films have been broadcast on PBS, CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, and around the world, winning over 15 international awards. In 1989, Kalle produced a 30-second television spot about the disappearing old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, and the rejection of this spot by commercial television stations inspired him to move into media activism. So in 1989, he started the Adbusters Media Foundation, which is a Vancouver, Canada-based nonprofit organization with 3 distinct arms: the award-winning Adbusters magazine, PowerShift Advocacy Advertising Agency, and the adbusters.org website and Culture Jammers Network. As the head of Adbusters Media Foundation, Kalle has launched international social marketing campaigns such as Buy Nothing Day, TV Turnoff Week, and Media Carta. Today, Kalle acts as editor-in-chief, art director, and publisher of the award-winning Adbusters magazine. Kalle's book, Culture Jam, The Uncooling of America, was published by HarperCollins in 1999. His newest book, Design Anarchy, an urgent call for artists, designers, architects, and communicators to re-engage with the world, was published in spring 2006. He lives with his wife Masako in Vancouver, and you can check out more information on Adbusters by just getting a copy of the magazine at your local independent bookstore or library. You can also go to their excellent website that is just packed with stuff, adbusters.org, and make sure to check out Prozac Spotlight, which is a whole focus on mental health issues. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, glad to be there.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what Adbusters magazine is, maybe for people who maybe don't know or haven't read the magazine?
Yeah, well, this magazine, Adbusters, we started it back in 1989. It was started by a bunch of people who we were various burnt-out activists of various types, burnt-out feminists and environmentalists and political lefties. And we felt that more and more we, the people, weren't generating our culture from the bottom up anymore. And our culture was increasingly being spoon-fed to us top-down by advertising agencies and television stations and then corporations. And we felt that the next big social activist movement of our time would be an attempt to take back culture from the people who had hijacked it, and this was the impetus behind Adbusters magazine and our website and the various books and other things that we've done since.
And looking at the magazine, it's very graphically striking, even shocking. Just a lot of really intense, strong images, like really sort of turning the tables on advertising.
As I said, we were disillusioned political lefties, a lot of us, and one of the things that we were disillusioned with was that the lefty magazines were all somehow unappetizing. They were heavy text tomes that you were lucky to get a cartoon thrown in every now and again, and a lot of lefty magazines are still like that. And right from the start, we decided that this culture jamming movement that we wanted to start, that this would be would be using all the tricks of the trade. We would be using the best artists, the best photographs. We would have a magazine that would be totally engaging in a multimedia way.
What are some examples of that, just the culture jamming aspect and the imagery and the things that Adbusters is doing?
Yeah, well, for example, right from the start, we decided that it wasn't just a magazine, but it was social marketing campaigns, and in the first few years we launched Buy Nothing Day and TV Turn-Off Week, and each one of those campaigns had associated with it posters and postcards and 30-second TV spots, mind bombs as we called them. So we were, we were sort of a magazine, a website, TV spots, print stuff, and right across the board we wanted to use all our sort of visual and intellectual talent to launch a wave of activism that would change the world.
Now, you've used this, the journal Adbusters is called the Journal of the Mental Environment, and I know that you've talked a lot about toxic culture and branding and kind of the psychology, and this is a radical mental health show. I'm really interested in sort of how do you think that all fits together in terms of this idea of the mental environment and toxic culture?
Yes, well, one of the, again, going back to 1989 when we first started, we talked a lot about how our culture had become a consumer culture and how we, the people, had stopped being citizens and then became consumers. We also talked a lot about what we call the ecology of the mind. We said, well, what does it mean, when we live in a mental environment that is polluted with all kinds of ads and lies, and we felt that so many of us growing up in this hyperactive consumer culture of ours, that so many of us we used this very, very, very sort of a nasty term. We felt that many of us are mind-f***ed, that we grow up from the moment we're little babies crawling around the TV set in the living room, we're being lied to and propagandized, and by the time we're teenagers, then we have been recruited into this consumer cult of the insatiables, people who have accepted this mainstream, you can be happy if you buy stuff kind of a culture. And we felt that this sort of a pollution of the mental environment, this mostly commercial pollution of the mental environment, but not just commercial. It also, with commercialism came more violence, violence-laced programming. With commercialism also came erotic tintillations, bogus erotic tintillations just to keep you watching. So right across the board, we felt that our mental environment was being polluted, and that this was causing stress, and that stress can sometimes lead to mood disorders, and that can then lead to depressions and anxiety attacks. So we had a feeling right from the start that our commercial culture was manufacturing mental illness in some sense.
There's a section on your website which is a Prozac Spotlight section, which is really interesting, and I know you've done a lot of coverage on pharmaceutical companies and looking at the role of the culture in generating what get labeled as mental illnesses.
Yeah. So instead of dealing with the culture and realizing that our culture took a wrong turn a while back, and we the people have to take back our culture and create a healthy bottoms-up culture again, where we, the people, create the cool and the trends and so on. Instead of that, nobody talks, and very few people talk about changing culture. When somebody has a mental problem, then we create pills, and we figure that we can solve the problem by giving them Prozac or Zoloft or whatever. And I think that this epidemic of mental illness that we're in now, this 300% increase in mental dysfunction over 2 generations, I think this is not going to abate unless we start working on our culture rather than working on the chemistry of our brains.
And who are the people who are reading Adbusters and also contributing to it and doing the design of it and making it all happen?
Yeah, well, we have a very interesting global network of artists and photographers and writers and journalists and foreign correspondents who feed into our website and into the magazine. We also have a way that people can sign up on our website to become a to join the Culture Jammers network, and that network has now grown to, last time I looked, it was 98,000 people around the world who had signed up and who communicate with us in various ways. We send out newsletters and launch campaigns and ask for various input into the magazine.
So this is not just the English-speaking world. This is all over the globe.
Yeah, but of course it tends to be mostly English-speaking because so far our website and our magazine is English. But next year we do have a plan to launch a Spanish edition of Adbusters magazine, and there are a number of other countries like Japan and Norway and the Netherlands and France and a number of other places in the world who have sort of created their own Adbusters type magazines, their own sort of environmental initiatives of various kinds, and this culture jamming movement is already sort of spreading around the world quite fast.
So you mentioned the Buy Nothing Day, which actually just happened, and also you have the National TV Turnoff Week. So why are these important things to do? How is this going to help the situation to buy nothing and to turn off your TV?
Yeah, well, I mean, that Buy Nothing Day and Buy Nothing Christmas are important social marketing campaigns to get people to think about the consequences of our consumption. Our consumption has gone up by threefold in the last 50 years. The average American today consumes 3 times more than the average American did after the Second World War. And yet it has been shown that we are no happier than we used to be. In fact, our happiness quotient has gone down somewhat, just marginally over the last 10 years or so. And overconsumption of the kind that we are engaged in, especially during Christmas time, I think it has, first of all, ecological consequences. That's obvious. It's obvious that every purchase we make has some sort of a ecological impact. Because we live in this hyperactive kind of a consumer culture, we're also inundated with approximately 3,000 marketing messages a day that seep into our brains, whether we like it or not. And as I said earlier, many of us feel stressed out by this kind of an onslaught. And so a lot of people get involved in Buy Nothing Day because they just want to escape the stress and the strain of living in this culture that bombards us. And then thirdly, a lot of people have joined Buy Nothing Day and Buy Nothing Christmas recently because of political reasons. These are people who understand that one of the root causes of our never-ending war against terror is this huge gulf between the rich and the poor people of the world. We, the rich 1 billion people on the planet, 20% of us, we consume over 80% of all the goodies in the global marketplace. That leaves a lousy 20% of the global pie for the rest of the 80%, the rest of the 5 billion people on the planet, and then we wonder why we have a problem on the planet where so many parts of the planet are rich breeding grounds for terror. So this realization of one of the root causes, one of the many root causes of this war on terror that we're fighting, this is a very powerful sort of under the radar kind of an issue that gets a lot of people thinking about this sort of opulent, decadent kind of overconsumptive culture that we've become.
Now, you mentioned the war on terror, and it seems clear that the tools of advertising and branding and publicity and public relations are being used by governments as part of the war on terror. Do you want to say something about that?
I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Second World War and the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and I must admit I have noticed that there has been that wars these days are as much physical wars as they are mental wars or meme wars, as I call them. And I think this most recent war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Even though at the moment I think that President Bush is losing that propaganda war, I think right from the start they saw it as a global kind of a mental tussle where we were the good guys who were spreading freedom and democracy around the world, and then the other side were evildoers who had to be exterminated. And I think this kind of a propaganda war that has become sort of an indispensable part of any war that any nation fights these days, and a lot of people are duped. And I think that in the months leading up to to the war in Iraq, I think that most of the people in the United States of America were duped.
Yeah, I'm holding up the latest issue, and the back of it is a cutout face image of Jesus Christ, and there's instructions on how you can be part of Buy Nothing Christmas by dressing up in robes and putting on a Jesus Christ mask, and then just doing public Buy Nothing protests. And then on the cover is a really striking image of a couple of SWAT police, and they've got a woman pinned to the ground and arresting her, except that she's sort of like a high fashion model, and there on the pavement, her Starbucks coffee is sort of spilled out on the concrete. So have you, it's very provocative, and have you gotten into any sort of trouble sort of taking on the global corporate consumer industry in such a direct and shocking kind of way?
Yeah, I must admit that we don't have any advertising. We're one of the few magazines left in the world with a hefty circulation. Our circulation is over 100,000 copies all around the world, and we have no advertising, and that gives us the kind of freedom to be provocative as we want to be, that most other magazines and newspapers and rest of the mass media doesn't have, and we basically say it like it is, and I think that our front cover this time says something about the sort of strange and weird merging of sexuality and fashion and the war on terror, and I think that back cover of Jesus, which is actually a cutout mask which you can put on, and this gives people who want to create a bit of an epiphany in the malls to sort of cut out this mask and put it on and walk slowly through a mall and give all those people who are there looking for last minute presents, something to think about. I think this is what we call culture jamming. These are the sort of direct actions that wake people out of their media consumer trances and make them think about what's really happening in the world.
And are there other culture jamming kinds of projects that Adbusters has been involved in?
Yeah, well, we usually try to think up things like that slow Jesus walk thing on the back cover of our current issue, and then we find that activists, given half a chance, that they are very innovative, creative people who think up the most incredible jams, and the whole history of Buy Nothing Day and TV Turnoff Week and has been a history of people, coming up with these, credit card cut-ups and all kinds of pranks and shenanigans that are a lot of fun and also change a lot of minds.
And I know also you have created these sort of uncommercials, the sort of with a sort of anti-message, and trying to get those aired on TV and radio. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, we were actually one of the things that we did very, very early on in our history, but way back in 1989, was we were having a tussle here with the forest industry in the Pacific Northwest here, and they had this $6 million campaign that was telling the people in the Pacific Northwest that you have nothing to worry about. We're doing a fantastic job managing your forests. You have forests forever was their slogan, and we a bunch of environmentalists. We thought, well, this is blatant lying. This is disinformation of the highest order, and we came up with our own 30-second spot that tried to tell the other side of the story, that most of the old growth has been cut down now, and we're down to just less than 20% of the old growth left. And when we approached the television stations with our 30-second spot, and we only had a small budget of about $25,000, but we were able to buy, a few dozen TV spots on around midnight and so on. They wouldn't sell us the airtime, even though they were selling $6 million worth of airtime to the forest industry. The TV stations didn't want to sell us a single time slot. This actually, for me personally, it was one of the great epiphanies of my life, this realization that there really is no democracy on the public airwaves, that even though there is this pretense that we call them the public airwaves, and it, theoretically those airwaves belong to the people, and the FCC is leasing those airwaves out to the broadcasters, who are then supposed to act in their own interest, of course, but also in the public interest, that this is just a pretense, and that when it comes to a battle of an environmental group versus some industry, then then the environmental group isn't even allowed to buy airtime in many cases. And this was one of the early epiphanies, this lack of democracy on our airwaves that has made me very angry and made a lot of other culture jammers very angry. And at the moment, we're actually fighting some legal actions here in Canada to win the legal right for Canadian citizen to walk into his or her local TV station, and plonk some money on the table and buy some airtime for some messages that they believe in.
So you've been doing this Adbusters and the Adbusters Foundation for several years now. What kind of lessons have you learned, sort of strategically, the things that you've encountered, and how has your sort of strategy and approach sort of changed over the years?
Over the 15 or so year history of Adbusters and of culture jamming, many of us have come to the conclusion that the political left has really blown it, in many, many ways, and that this sort of a whiny, complaint-based activism that so much of the political left has been involved in over the last generation or so has really turned a lot of people off and has been almost totally ineffective in achieving anything. So we culture jammers are what we're basically trying to do is jump over the dead body of the old left and come up with out of the box solutions for the problems that we face, and I think this is the one big strategic lesson that we've learned, that if all you do is point fingers at the big bad corporations like Nike or ExxonMobil, and if you're basically a complaint-based activism that actually doesn't have any optimistic, great new visions or great big ideas, then ultimately you're not going to achieve anything. That now we maybe, now that it feels like the political left is starting to be in some sort of ascendancy again, but for the last 20 or 30 years, we have really blown it, and now we've got a lot of work ahead of us.
But looking through Adbusters, it is pretty anti-protest kind of oriented. I mean, what are some of the sort of hopeful...
How do you mean anti-protest?
Well, in the sense of sort of attacking corporations, the cover is sort of like a put down of Starbucks. And what are some of the positive sort of things that you find are hopeful and sort of the positive directions that we should be going in?
Yeah, well, for example, after about 15 years of this no sweat movement where people went against the Nike and tried to convince the Nike corporation to change its business ways and not to have its shoes made in sweatshops and so on, which was partially successful, but it was basically point your finger at Nike and put some pressure on them and whine and complain about them, and somehow we were hoping this would solve the problem, but it didn't. And one of the things that we did a few years back was we said, okay, we're going to come up with our own Black Spot logo. We're going to come up with our own line of Black Spot sneakers and Black Spot boots, and we're going to go into direct competition with Nike. We're going to unswoosh the Nike swoosh, and we're going to create a new kind of cool in the sneaker industry. And this was something that a lot of lefties complained about, because lefties usually don't like logos, and they don't like the marketplace, and they don't really like business all that much either, and they hate capitalism, many of us. And yet we sort of broke all the rules there, and we launched a grassroots business venture and created and cut a little bit into the market share of Nike and created a lot of positive mood, positive feeling among activists who have a bit of a business bent. And now we're trying to rent a shop right next to Starbucks here in Vancouver, and we want to open up a culture shop, a culture coffee shop right next to Starbucks. And instead of Starbucks coming into our city and kicking independent coffee shops out, we're going to go head on head with Starbucks right next to them and try to prove that we can make better coffee and give a better mood to customers than Starbucks can. And I think this kind of a grassroots entrepreneurship, as we call it, I think this is one example of the sort of out-of-the-box thinking that we lefties need to do.
And so this is actually a shoe line that people can actually buy these shoes, the Black Spot shoes? And
yeah, you can go to blackspot.sneaker.org, or you can go to our adbusters.org website, and And over the last couple of years, we've come up with a very interesting shoe that is made from 100% organic hemp, and the sole of the shoe is made from recycled, used automobile tires, and it's a really cool-looking shoe, and we've already sold 20,000 pairs of that shoe.
That's fantastic. And just wait, we're running out of time, but there's so much to talk about. But I just wanted to ask you, are you ever concerned about the dangers of co-optation? That maybe some of the success of Adbusters is really part of the way that the system is maybe responding to and absorbing and co-opting what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that, and I think that this co-opting that you talk about is something that has happened to pretty well the whole of the political left over the last 20 years. We've been co-opted by corporate and commercial and other forces, and we haven't really been able to achieve anything. With Adbusters, when we first started, then we were 100% volunteer-driven. People walked into our headquarters and did some artwork for us and wrote stories for us, and bit by bit this totally volunteer-driven thing wasn't somehow working, and when we started hiring some people and renting bigger offices and Buy Nothing Day became bigger and bigger until it was celebrated in 65 countries around the world, and we grew into this much larger kind of an entity that all of a sudden had cash flow problems, and we were trying to so in a way, I really do understand how organizations have a springtime and a summertime, and then they have an autumn, and then they have sometimes they have a winter. And I've, for example, another organization that was launched here in Vancouver was Greenpeace. And Greenpeace now is still doing a lot of good work, but it is an organization that is sort of, probably in its autumn, I would say. So all the people here at Adbusters, we are very aware of this seasonal kind of a thing that can happen to organizations, and we're trying our best to, we feel at the moment that we're still in the middle of summer, and that we still have a lot of energy in us before we perhaps inevitably go into this autumn phase.
Any last thoughts you want to leave us with?
Yeah, the big thought that I've been thinking about recently is that I can feel that now, we, whatever you want to call us, are progressives or lefties or whatever, and Democrats. I think there is a chance for us now to sort of start getting our energy back on campus and in the political sphere in all its phases. But I'm a little bit afraid that it may just turn out to be more business as usual. I'm afraid that the political left may still not have learned its lesson, and that we still haven't quite come up with those big new ideas like two-cost markets and the right to communicate and black spot anti-logos. And I would like to urge anybody who's listening to your radio show to fearlessly think outside the old lefty box.
Kalle Lasn, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to an interview with Kalle Lasn. Kalle is the co-founder of the Adbusters Media Foundation, an internationally known media activist, publisher, and filmmaker. You can check out more about Adbusters magazine by going to your local independent bookstore or the library. You can also go to the Adbusters website, which is www.adbusters.org, and check out the Black Spot sneaker shop where you can buy anti-logo footwear, and also take a look at the Prozac Spotlight section, which is all about mental health issues. Thanks for tuning in. For more information, check the website freedom-center.org, and we now have a new domain, madnessradio.net. We're going to be having a new website soon, so be on the lookout for that. I want to thank Jeremy Lantzman for his work syndicating Madness Radio in Alaska, and also thanks to our co-sponsors, the Freedom Center, freedom-center.org, and the Icarus Project, theicarusproject.net. We will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.